Imagine the white cliffs of Dover. In our history, they are the enduring symbol of hope, the first sight of home for 300,000 exhausted men returning from the hell of the beaches. They stand as the fortress wall that Hitler could not breach. But imagine if the horizon remained empty. Imagine a world where the miracle of Dunkirk never happened, where the English Channel did not become a highway of rescue, but a moat of despair, where the little ships never sailed, or worse, sailed into a massacre they could not escape. In this timeline, the Second World War does not end in the ruins of Berlin in 1945. It ends in a humid railway carriage in Compiègne in June 1940. The British Expeditionary Force is not saved to fight another day, it is captured in its entirety. Winston Churchill is not remembered as the bulldog who saved Western civilization, but as the reckless gambler who lost Britain's entire professional army in a single week. The swastika does not just fly over Paris, it casts a shadow over a neutralized, humiliated Britain that has been forced to sign a peace treaty with the Third Reich. In this world, the finest hour never strikes. The clock stops at 5 minutes to midnight. To understand how close Britain came to total defeat, we have to look at the map of May 1940. It is a terrifying picture. The German blitzkrieg had shattered the French lines. The Panzers were not just advancing, they were racing across France at a speed that modern military strategists still find impossible to comprehend. By late May, the British Expeditionary Force, the BEF, was cut off. Their backs were to the sea. They were surrounded on 3 sides by the finest army in the world, and in front of them lay the cold, unforgiving waters of the North Sea. Winston Churchill, who had been Prime Minister for less than 3 weeks, stood before the House of Commons and warned the nation to prepare for hard and heavy tidings. Privately, the Admiralty was far more pessimistic. They launched Operation Dynamo with the hope of saving perhaps 45,000 men. That was the target, 45,000. They believed the rest, over 300,000 soldiers, would be killed or captured. But then, the impossible happened. In our timeline, we call it a miracle, and scientifically, it almost defies explanation. The English Channel is notorious for its treacherous currents and violent storms. Yet, for 9 critical days, the sea became as flat as a mill pond. It was the calmest the Channel had been for a generation. This allowed the famous little ships, the pleasure yachts, the fishing trawlers, the lifeboats, to cross without capsizing. Simultaneously, a dense mist rolled over the beaches of Flanders. It was thick enough to blind the German Luftwaffe pilots overhead, preventing them from annihilating the packed rows of waiting soldiers. Yet the sea below remained clear enough for navigation. It was a perfect storm of luck. The weather fought for the Allies. But the weather wasn't the only thing that saved the British Army. There was a human error involved, a hesitation, a specific order given by the German High Command that remains one of the most debated decisions in military history.
It is May 24, 1940. The German 19th Panzer Corps, led by the brilliant and aggressive General Guderian, is just 15 miles from Dunkirk. The British defenses are non-existent. The retreating troops are disorganized, terrified, and lacking heavy anti-tank weaponry. Guderian looks through his binoculars. He can see the spires of the town. He knows he can take the port in a matter of hours, sealing the trap before the evacuation can even begin. He picks up the radio to give the order to attack. But the order never comes. Instead, a command arrives from General von Rundstedt, endorsed by Hitler himself. Halt. The Panzers are ordered to stop. For 48 critical hours, the German tanks sit idle, their engines cooling, while Guderian screams into his radio in frustration. Hitler believed the marshy terrain of Flanders would bog down his precious tanks, which he wanted to save for the final push into Paris. Furthermore, Hermann Göring, the head of the Luftwaffe, had promised Hitler that his air force alone could destroy the trapped British army. "Let the Luftwaffe do it," he boasted. That 48-hour delay was the only reason the British had time to build a defensive perimeter. It was the only reason the ships could load. But the danger wasn't just on the beaches. While the soldiers dug into the sand, a different kind of war was being fought in the smoke-filled rooms of London. We often remember Winston Churchill as the undisputed leader of a united Britain. The truth is far more fragile. In May 1940, Churchill's position was incredibly weak. He was seen by many in the establishment as a warmonger and a drunkard. Sitting across from him in the War Cabinet was Lord Halifax, the Foreign Secretary. Halifax was not a villain, he was a pragmatist. He looked at the map, saw the collapse of France, and believed that continuing the war would lead to the total destruction of British cities and the end of the empire. He drafted a proposal to approach Mussolini, Italy's dictator, to broker a peace deal with Hitler. The War Cabinet minutes from May 26th to May 28th reveal a government on the brink of collapse. Halifax threatened to resign if his peace proposal was ignored. If Halifax resigned, the government would fall and Churchill would be ousted. Churchill only survived by begging his colleagues for more time. He needed a miracle. He needed the army back. If Dunkirk failed, if the army was lost, Churchill's argument for fighting on would be destroyed. Lord Halifax would be vindicated, and the peace process would begin. So the fate of the world didn't just hang on the soldiers, it hung on a single German order to stop the tanks. And in our story, that order is never given. The timeline splits at 11:30 a.m., May 24, 1940. The location is General von Rundstedt's headquarters in Charleville. In our history, Adolf Hitler arrives, nods in agreement with Rundstedt's caution, and confirms the order to halt the tanks. He decides to conserve the armor for the final push into France. But in this timeline, the atmosphere in the room is different. General Franz Halder, the chief of General Staff, who was furiously opposed to the halt in real life, finds the courage to intervene. He places fresh reconnaissance photos on the table. He points to the chaotic British columns retreating toward the coast. He argues that the marshy ground Hitler fears is actually passable, and that the British are not digging in, they are running. He appeals to Hitler's darkest fear, the fear of letting the enemy escape to fight another day. If we stop now, mein Führer, Halder warns, we give them the gift of time. Hitler hesitates. He looks at the map. The silence in the room is heavy. Then the decision flips. The caution vanishes. He turns to Rundstedt and snaps a single command. Do not stop. Annihilate them. At the forward command post of the 19th Panzer Corps, General Guderian is pacing by his half-track, watching the precious minutes tick away. His radio operator suddenly straightens up, pressing the headset to his ear. Guderian expects the order to hold. Instead, he hears the one word he has been praying for: Angriff, attack.
The change is visceral. In our history, the soldiers on the beaches remember an eerie, terrifying silence before the Stuka bombers arrived. In this timeline, there is no silence. There is only the roar of 500 Maybach tank engines revving in unison. The 1st Panzer Division doesn't wait. They smash through the thin British perimeter at the AA Canal before the Royal Engineers can blow the bridges. The British rear guard, exhausted and low on ammunition, is overrun in minutes. There was no time to establish the defensive line that held for a week in our reality. The Panzers reach the coast by sunset on May 24th. When the first destroyers and little ships arrive from Dover the next morning, they don't find waiting lines of men wading into the water. They find Panzer IV tanks hull down on the dunes, their 75-millimeter guns trained on the sea. The East Mole, the long concrete jetty that was the lifeline for nearly 200,000 men in our history, is the first target. German artillery strikes it within the hour. It shatters. The little ships are not greeted by cheering soldiers, but by a wall of high explosive fire. Fishing trawlers are blown out of the water. Yachts are machine-gunned by tanks parked on the beach. Inside the town of Dunkirk, the trap snaps shut. 300,000 men are squeezed into a burning pocket of rubble. Panic begins to set in. The Dunkirk spirit never has a chance to form. This isn't an evacuation anymore. It's a killing field. By the morning of May 28th, the situation is terminal. The beaches, which in our history were organized loading zones, are now a graveyard of burning Bedford trucks and shattered equipment. General Lord Gort, the commander-in-chief of the BEF, is a man known for his physical courage. He won the Victoria Cross in the First World War, but courage cannot stop a panzer division. He sits in a makeshift bunker in the cellar of a ruined hotel, the ceiling shaking with every impact of German artillery. The reports coming in are identical. No ammunition, no water, flanks overrun. He realizes that to continue fighting is not duty, it is murder. At 900 hours, he makes the decision that breaks his heart. He orders the white flag to be raised over the Dunkirk town hall. The firing slowly dies down, replaced by a stunned, heavy silence. The image that defines this war is not a Spitfire flying over the cliffs of Dover. It is the sight of 330,000 British soldiers, the fathers, the sons, the veterans, the entire professional corps of the army, marching in endless gray columns towards the east. They are not going home. They are going to prison camps in Poland and Germany, where they will rot for 5 years. Equipment worth billions is seized intact by the Wehrmacht, but the loss of the men is the fatal blow. Britain has plenty of rifles, but it has no one left to fire them. The island is defenseless. The shockwave hits London before the surrender is even official. In our timeline, the miracle of Dunkirk was spun as a moral victory. It galvanized the nation. It gave Churchill the political capital to scream, "We shall fight on the beaches." But in this timeline, there is no miracle to spin. There is only catastrophe. Parliament meets in a session of absolute fury on May 29th. The atmosphere is toxic. Winston Churchill, the man who had been in power for less than a month, stands up to speak. He looks aged, pale, and shaken. He tries to summon the rhetoric of defiance, but the House is silent. The blood, toil, tears, and sweat he promised has resulted only in the loss of the entire army. Neville Chamberlain, the former Prime Minister, is dying of cancer, but he still wields immense power in the Conservative Party. He leans over to Lord Halifax. The nod is given. The vote of no confidence is swift and brutal. Churchill is not just removed, he is eviscerated. He walks out of number 10 Downing Street into the pouring rain, a broken man, jeered by the press as the gravedigger of the empire. That evening, the BBC interrupts its regular broadcast. The static clears, and a new voice comes on the air. It is not the growling, defiant baritone of Churchill. It is a calm, aristocratic, pragmatic voice. It is the voice of reason in a world gone mad. "My fellow countrymen," Lord Halifax begins, "we have fought a gallant fight, but we must face the reality of the hour. We cannot fight a war without an army. We must save what remains of our civilization. I have today sent a message to Signor Mussolini in Rome to ask for terms. The war isn't over, but the fighting is." The negotiations take place in June 1940, not in Berlin, but in Southampton. A symbolic gesture that the war has come to British soil, but not by invasion. Adolf Hitler, who always harbored a strange, twisted admiration for the British Empire, offers terms that Lord Halifax finds generous. He does not demand the occupation of London. He does not demand the dismantling of the Royal Navy. He knows that trying to govern the British Isles would be a nightmare. Instead, the Treaty of Southampton outlines a new world order. Germany is recognized as the supreme master of continental Europe. Britain retains its empire overseas, but agrees to total neutrality. The Royal Navy is confined to specific ports, monitored by German U-boats. But the devil is in the details. The treaty demands a friendly government in London. Political dissidents, anti-fascist refugees, and prominent Jewish figures who had fled to Britain are handed over to the Gestapo. The blackout curtains come down and the lights go back on in London, but the atmosphere is suffocating. Oswald Mosley, leader of the British Union of Fascists, is released from prison. He doesn't become Prime Minister, that would be too provocative, but he becomes Minister of the Interior. Uniformed black shirts begin to appear on the streets of London, not as invaders, but as auxiliaries to the police. The Union Jack still flies, but it flies alongside the swastika at the German embassy in Carlton House Terrace. Britain has survived, but it has sold its soul. It has become a larger, colder version of Vichy France. With Britain neutralized, the map of the world shifts violently. In our timeline, Hitler kept millions of troops and thousands of aircraft in the West to guard against a British invasion. He fought the Battle of Britain. He fought the Battle of the Atlantic. He fought in North Africa. In this timeline, all of those resources are free. In the spring of 1941, Operation Barbarossa, the invasion of the Soviet Union, is launched. But it is not the invasion we know. It is a tidal wave. The Luftwaffe, with no losses from the Battle of Britain, dominates the skies totally. The Panzer divisions, fully refitted and not worn down by campaigns in Greece or Africa, smash into the Red Army with terrifying force. There are no Arctic convoys carrying American supplies to Russia because the Royal Navy is blockaded in Scapa Flow. Stalin is fighting alone. Moscow falls in October 1941. The Soviet government flees behind the Urals. The 1,000-year Reich stretches from the Atlantic to the Volga. Across the ocean, the United States watches in horror, but without Britain as a forward base, an unsinkable aircraft carrier, Franklin D. Roosevelt is paralyzed. The arsenal of democracy has no one to send weapons to. The isolationist movement, led by Charles Lindbergh, sweeps the country. Why die for a Europe that has already surrendered, they ask. FDR loses the 1940 election or is forced into a strictly defensive posture. The U.S. becomes a fortress, locking its doors, turning inward. The Atlantic Ocean becomes a tense, silent no-man's land between two nuclear-armed superpowers in waiting. The Cold War begins not in 1945, but in 1941, and the Iron Curtain is not in Berlin, it is on the beaches of New Jersey. History is often described as a river rushing inevitably towards its destination, but sometimes it is a spider's web. A single thread breaks, a storm clears over the channel, a tank engine stalls, or an order is given 48 hours too late, and the entire structure collapses. The miracle of Dunkirk was not inevitable. It was a statistical anomaly. It was the desperate gamble of a nation that refused to accept logic. If those tanks had not stopped, the free world as we know it would not exist. The English language, the maps we study, and the governments we vote for, they are all ghosts of a reality that survived by the skin of its teeth. So I leave you with this question. In a world where Britain surrendered in 1940 and the Soviet Union fell in 1941, do you think the United States could have stood alone? Could a fortress America have survived a Cold War against a fully nuclear Nazi superpower? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you want to see more timelines where history hangs by a thread, make sure to subscribe.